In today's lesson, we'll be looking at the snapshots which let us take data from the internet in the form of an RSS XML feed. We'll also begin to work on developing our database based on requirements for database structure, which was outlined in a previous lesson. So let's look at snapshot number 3. We'll be focusing on one specific piece of this application for this snapshot. Now this took approximately an hour and 15 minutes. We'll double click this and get into this refresh RSS feed _ click event. We've created the code needed to get the data, so we'll show you the end result. Click this and you'll see that I get a series of message boxes, each one containing the values, the title, the link, and the description for RSS feed on msdn.microsoft.com. So we continue to click the OK button and it carries on iterating through the RSS feed, displaying the data in a message box with each news item. This is what we have worked on for snapshot number 3. So I have used a hard code value to get this RSS feed from msdn.microsoft.com. I hard coded it because I needed to work with a live XML feed. I didn't want to repeatedly enter it, and right now I don't have a database to save all my channels in. I just wanted to test out something and see if I could get one XML feed out of the internet. So if I could make it work with one, then it would work with every feed as they're all based on the same standard. So now onto our method. You'll note on lines 149 and 150, I create a web request and web response object. And what this does is encapsulate all the information that .NET needs to find the URL out of the internet. So we create a new location, which is the RSS URL, and this has been hard-coded in line 146. And then we use the request.getResponse object so we can retrieve the data back from the internet. This sets the request object into action by calling its getResponse method. It also returns the values, the RSS XML file down to myResponse object. We can then use the myResponse object, which is on line 153, and extract out the response stream. This is basically a stream of information. So the lines of code 153, 156, 158 are very similar to when we worked with XML in lesson 10. So now we have a stream, we can align 156 and 158 and turn that into an XML document. So we'll turn the unformatted string of characters into something useful on line 158 by calling that RSS.doc load and passing in the RSS stream. Now let's look at lines 163. When we're using an XPath query in order to find all the individual news items for our specific channel, we'll use this RSS doc XML document object, select nodes and take out only the nodes which fit this query, which are the items, and put those into an XML node list called RSS items. And we'll then iterate through this node list. There's 3 temporary variables created here, which are title, link, and description. They will store the values which we pull out for each news item and use them to display in a message box. So now we'll loop through all of our RSS items, which is a list of XML nodes, each RSS item which we collected from our feed. We'll loop through each one and try to pull off the title, link, and description from each news item. So we create an XML node in line 175, which we'll call RSS detail. This will give us the children of the individual news item. So what we'll do is RSS items, and I is the current one in our loop. Then select single node and title. This will give us the title node of that XML document. We need to ensure that it's not empty. If it's not empty, then we take it and place it in the temporary variable called title. Otherwise, we'll set title equal to an empty string. We'll do the same thing for the link and for the detail. Then we'll bring them together in line 213 to show the title, link, and the description. So from line 207 to 211, I have a list of items to do, like check to make sure that this particular news item is already in the database. If not, then add it, then remove the message box. So as we've tested it, we know it's working. It goes out, click this, refresh RSS. It created a request object. Use the request object to get a response object, which is all the data from that rss.xml file on msdn.microsoft.com. It passed through and put it into an XML document where it will go through each of the news item elements of the XML document and then pull off the title, link and description, put them in temporary variables, then display them in a message box. So when I'm developing this application, I could put all the code necessary to get the XML in this button, the code behind for my refresh RSS button. This works well in the first stages of development, but it's probably not a good idea to put all of my business logic, which is not the way of operating your business, which is actually a generic term for the logic of your application. Those operations which make your application unique and generally the technical stuff which take place behind the scenes. So we may not want to take this code we just wrote, so from line 146 to the end of the event handler on line 213 and place it into its own class. The other benefit of doing this is if I want to use this function in another application in the future, it would be really simple to take the file that we'll create for this and include it in my next project. Also, as I've ensured that there are no bugs, I wouldn't have to go through the whole process again each time I work with the RSS feed. It may be an idea to think about making this more generalized rather than specific to this particular application. So now let's look at Snapshot 4. The idea in Snapshot 4 is taking that RSS retrieval code, which I wrote in Snapshot number 3, and putting it into its own class. So there are some benefits into doing this. One is a clear delineation between the code that will display data on screen versus the code that retrieves the data from the internet. So if we keep our application loosely together in that way, it would be easy to reuse that code in other applications. Another benefit is that when we're working with our application, it's less code each in physical file that we're working. So I have created a new file in our application by right-clicking on the project, selecting Add New Item, and then creating a new class. And I created an RSS Manager class. So except the first line of code, I've taken the rest of the code, which I wrote in the previous snapshot, and placed it in this refresh RSS method. So this refresh RSS method will accept one parameter of string, RSS URL, and we'll pass in the msdn.microsoft.com rss.xml file in the form of string. The rest of the code is exactly the same. Nothing about it has been changed except for the bottom where I make a reference to system.windows.forms.messagebox. This is because in a class it doesn't have knowledge of this system.windows.forms namespace, so it was necessary to add it. So in the end, this does exactly the same thing as Snapshot 3. So whenever you now click on Refresh RSS from our main form, we still have the same line of code where I'm hard coding the RSS URL. But this time I'm just calling the Refresh RSS method of the RSS Manager and passing in the RSS URL. So I've created this as a static method. This makes it available without having to create an instance of the RSS Manager class. In the main form .cs, I had to create an instance of the RSS Manager class. I used the static method, refresh RSS. The reason I did that is because refresh RSS is a utility. It's not your typical creating an instance of the RSS where there may be multiple instances necessary to reflect multiple RSSs. We need a utility, and the RSS Manager class is a good wrapper for that utility. So it's used as a static method for that reason, so that you don't have to create a new instance of it. Now we'll test our application to make sure nothing's been broken. This is another good best practice. Wherever you make changes to your code, always test it frequently. So we need to make sure the change didn't break anything, and if it did, then we can isolate that change. So this snapshot was fairly short as we did a very obvious thing. Now, however, it's important from a code separation viewpoint. It's more to do with the concept of how we're going about the development rather than something that was a necessity in order to make the application work. The code could have been left within the refresh RSS feed click. That would work, but would have made our application a bit more clunky. This way, it's more easier to use. We can use the RSS Manager class and other applications. So we're looking at how to structure applications in a way so that they can be reused later. So now we've completed the retrieval of the RSS data and we have to place it somewhere. We'll create the database in Snapshot 5 and start linking to some of the controls on our form. So after an hour of software development, we have snapshot number 5. Firstly, in this snapshot, I was able to create through the Database Explorer the RSS MDF file. It's also displayed within our Solution Explorer. To add the file, I right-click, select and add new item, select SQL Database, change this RSS MDF and click the Add button. After this, I wanted to create a data set. So I went up to the data menu, select Add New Data Source, and then selected my database, the RSS MDF. So the result of this would be RSS dataset.xse. Looking at the dataset, you'll see that its hierarchy and structure is very similar to the database structure which we created. So there's the same columns and same table names, etc. So to ensure that everything worked and we get the data from the database and display on screen, we just need to do a quick binding of the controls. So I data bound the folder combo box to the folder binding source. I then went to other data sources and drilled down until I found the folder table. This then automatically created the folder binding source. Once this was added, I selected the display member and the value member. The display member will be the folder name. So we want to display the name in the combo box, and behind the scenes each folder name would be associated with the folder ID. We use the folder ID to find relationships between a certain folder and all the channels that are associated by that primary foreign key relationship through this folder ID field. So same thing with channels, bound it to the channel binding source. I went to other data sources, drilled down and selected channels. It added this channel binding source, configured it. I could then select the channel title and the channel ID for the display member and value member. Then same thing for the news item list box. So we'll run the application and see if we can pull data from the data page. So I have my folders, my channels and my news items. Right now, these three controls are working independently and not in tandem. So basically I'm binding to all the folders, to all the channels and to all the news items. Ideally, when we select a folder, it will only display those channels which are associated with that folder. This is also the case when we select a channel, which will only display the news items associated with that channel. This will be our next step, which we'll discuss in the next lesson. So until then, do take care and bye bye for now.